Garden Basics with Farmer Fred is brought to you by Smart Pots, the original lightweight, long-lasting fabric plant container. It's made in the USA. Visit smartpots.com/Fred for more information and a special discount. That's smartpots.com/Fred. Welcome to the Garden Basics with Farmer Fred podcast. If you're just a beginning gardener or you want good gardening information, well, you've come to the right spot. The signs of spring are everywhere here in suburban purgatory. There's sneezing and runny eyes that are becoming more commonplace, thanks to the flying pollen from the blooming acacia trees. Skunks, they're in search of a mate, and they're prowling about at night. And the indoor bathtub where the dogs got an emergency bath still smells like skunk. And the hairy bittercress weed is carpet bombing the yard with its explosive seed cases, hence one of its common names, popseed. But you know, for me, the real sign of the beginning of spring, it's time for the annual Garden Basics Tomato Preview Show. Ah, yes. Once again, you're invited to eavesdrop on a conversation between two real tomato heads, myself and Don Shor, the proprietor of Redwood Barn Nursery in Davis, California. We recap our tomato successes and failures of 2023 and talk about what we will be planting in 2024. It'll feature tried and true tomato varieties, along with several newcomers, more than 24, maybe even 36 varieties that we pass judgment on and will attempt to grow. Or not grow. Plus, I recently asked the Get Growing with Farmer Fred Facebook page readers what their favorite tomato varieties are, and they weren't shy about answering. And we'll recap a tomato trial conducted at the Fair Oaks Horticulture Center last summer by the Sacramento County Master Gardeners. So we'll be talking about some of those tomatoes as well. Don also has tips for making your tomato growing efforts in 2024 a rousing success, at least as long as the weather cooperates. It's all in this episode, number 317 of today's Garden Basics, the 2024 Tomato Preview Show. We're podcasting from Barking Dog Studios here in the beautiful Abutilon Jungle in suburban purgatory. It's the Garden Basics with Farmer Fred podcast, brought to you today by Smart Pots and Dave Wilson Nursery. Let's go. It may be tomato time where you live, but for most of America, we need to wait a while. But we can certainly think about tomatoes, and that's what we're doing with today's show. We're thinking about 2024 tomatoes. Which ones are you going to plant? What did you have success with last year? What new ones are you going to try, or at least new to you? To have a decent tomato conversation, it has to be two tomato heads jabbering, and I can't think of anybody else to bring on except Don Shor, owner of Redwood Barn Nursery in Davis, a true tomato head who usually plants, I think last year, Don, you had, 40 varieties?
Yeah, that sounds about right. And it's a lot more than I need, but, you got to test them all. I'm a retailer. I got to make sure they're good.
Okay.
I tell myself that every year.
All right. Well, let's do a quick recap of our 2023 tomato garden.
Okay.
And I know that for me, the big winner last year was Rugby, based on your endorsement of that tomato over the last couple of years. And Rugby is just a wonderful tomato. I had a lot of luck with it. I don't know how you describe it. Is it aroma tomato? Is it a paste tomato? Is it a saladette tomato? It's bigger than your standard paste tomatoes, but it is meaty enough to use as a slicer in a sandwich.
Yeah, it's a very solid tomato, so people who know Roma will be very familiar with this style. It's a very meaty tomato, which is a funny term we use for tomatoes. It is a big fruit. It's been every year I've grown it. I've been 3 or 4 years now. Very consistent producer. And yeah, it doesn't take very many of them to make a sauce. It's a very large fruit and very consistent, reliable producer. Rugby has quickly moved up into my top 10 list from the first year that I grew it. And I recommend it highly. It is one you'll either have to find the seed yourself or go to some little garden center where they start them for you. Pause. But you still have time, if you haven't started all your seeds yet, to get that one going. Rugby has been outstanding. I mean, I can't think of a tomato that's moved so quickly into my top 20, then top 10 list as this particular one. Originally from Bulgaria. A customer mentioned it to me. And so I ordered the seed. Now you can get the seed from your typical online vendors, and it grows very, very well and a very good producer here. So yes, you and I definitely agree on Rugby.
Yeah, Rugby is a good one. I will be planting it again, definitely. My biggest failure in 2023, and it wasn't my fault at all, it was the Gardener's Delight tomato, which is a slightly larger cherry tomato, but it's very prolific. It's usually the first to produce in late spring and the last to croak usually in December. Yeah. But the seeds that I planted, even though the package said Gardener's Delight, what came out was a run-of-the-mill cherry tomato. To me, it smells like jalapeno gate, only for tomatoes.
Oh, it was. I mean, 2023 will definitely go down in the annals of tomato history for the seed mix-ups. I strongly recommend the Chef's Choice series, for example. None of my Chef's Choice that I happened to bring home from my own garden center came true from the label. My Chef's Choice Orange, which is an absolute top performer of mine, it was some red tomato. I don't know what it was. It was fine if you needed a red tomato, but it definitely was not what I expected. So there was a major mix-up in the industry. It was at the seed distribution level is all I can figure, and it really affected a lot of us. So yeah, jalapeno gate definitely expanded to all the ingredients of salsa, including, I'm sorry to say, the tomato. So I still highly recommend the Chef's Choice series, and I strongly recommend Chef's Choice Orange based on previous years. And let's hope they've got the logistics all worked out this coming year. Of that whole series, there's 7 or 8 of them now. They all produce well. They're all very large fruited, but really the one that I find the most useful, simply because it's a little firmer texture and more consistent, is that Chef's Choice Orange. So it's still on my top 10, just got a demerit for last year.
Chef's Choice, several of the Chef's Choice tomatoes have been All-America Selections winners as well.
Yeah, they're introduced by a seed breeder here in the Sacramento Valley. And so that's pretty unusual, honestly. Most of the tomatoes you're looking at when you're going into nurseries and hardware stores haven't been bred in a region like our Valley Heat. And this one has been, and the whole series has been outstanding. So let's give them what is the term? Give them a mulligan for last year.
Yeah, jalapeno gate refers to the big mix-up in the world of peppers, where people who thought they were buying jalapeno peppers actually ended up with sweet peppers. And unfortunately, the reverse also was true. There were sweet peppers for sale that turned out to be a little warmer than sweet.
Yes, and that's a disappointment for some people there. So it was an interesting problem in the whole industry. So we'll just kind of play on previous year's recommendations for that one. Now, I have to say, every year I have one plant that just grows incredibly robust compared to all the others. It's never the same one, of course, and produces really, really heavily. And this year, for me, that was Juliet. Now, I recommend Juliet very highly for a lot of reasons. I did a quick grid count estimate of, just trying to figure out how many fruit my plant produced. It was something close to 400.
Ooh.
Yeah, and they were still producing, when I went out there at the end of the season, it's like the beginning of November, I'm going out there to cut the vines down and get everything cleaned up for the fall and plant cover crops. And I walked up to this thing. I said, this is ridiculous. I walked into the house. I got a great big bowl, and I picked another 100 fruit and made another batch of sauce from them. Juliet has been very consistent since it was introduced. It's an All-America winner, I do believe, from about 20 years ago, maybe more than that at this point. Everywhere it seems to yield well. It's an interesting, hard to describe variety because it's small, elongated, kind of like a San Marzano, very firm, very solid. Thin skin that just cooks down immediately, so you don't really even have to peel them, and a very light seed count for me. So this one just cooks down into a sauce beautifully, but I know most other people are happy to throw it in their salads and use it as what they're now calling a saladette type tomato. Juliet just continues to be an outstanding performer. And it's one of those ones where if you're looking for just one tomato, and so you want kind of an all-purpose and it's going to do well, Juliet is definitely in that category.
One that you have recommended over the years, and I finally broke down and tried it, and it was actually It was successful the second year I tried it. And that's another Don Shor rule about planting tomatoes. Give them 3 years. Plant them for 3 years and see if you still like it. And Bodacious did quite well for me in 2023. It was the last plant to give up, and I harvested the remaining green ones in November, and I finally finished the green ones as they ripened slowly in the garage. I finished those off in late February.
Yeah, it's been about a very good performer. If you're looking for something in what we sometimes call the beefsteak category, which we can talk about separately, a large slicing one with good connective tissue that you could use in a sandwich, Bodacious is probably your best bet here in the Sacramento Valley. We need to mention, beefsteak was a variety. It's now sort of a term for a type of tomato. But in general, what it refers to is one that you can slice, and that slice will hold together with enough connective tissue that you could use it just like that, as on a sandwich or something like that. Bodacious has great flavor, holds well, has taken heat very well for me, continues to be a good performer for me.
Another one of your perennial favorites, and I've been planting it now for like 3 or 4 years. I finally run out of seed. I'm going to have to get some fresh seed, is the New Girl tomato.
Yes, New Girl has been out yielding Early Girl for me for the last 2 years. I finally did them side by side to do a direct comparison. The Early Girl, you really can't go wrong with it. If you're a fan of Early Girl, by all means, keep planting it. But every now and then, another contender comes along for that throne. And New Girl is one of that category and has been a very good performer for me. And the people actually, in a blind tasting, very informal, liked the flavor a little better. Now, that could have just been that fruit was a little riper, who knows? But overall, giving Early Girl, which has been around since the 1970s, a run for its money. And a lot of people want to try new ones. Well, I would think New Girl. There's another one out there called Tough Boy. Some people are doing that one and have had very good results with that. Another one where they're trying for that same 4 to 6 ounce fruit size, nice round red tomato, good flavor, good all-purpose thing. That's another good one. But that New Girl has impressed me, and it is, as I say, it might displace Early Girl from its throne.
Whoa, okay. I imagine that you've already been besieged by customers who maybe they're smart enough to know not to plant tomatoes now. They still want to secure probably 1 or 2 that did well for them last year. What are your customers wanting an encore from?
Well, that one in particular, New Girl, I've mentioned it many times. Rugby is one we're definitely going to have available. There's one that I've been recommending, and it's going to be a hard one to find unless the nursery started it themselves. That's Blue Ribbon. The Blue Ribbon tomato came out a few years ago. It's been, it's hard to compete in the red tomato market. There's a lot of really good red tomatoes out there. What I have to say about this one, it doesn't crack. It doesn't split. It didn't get blossom end rot. The fruit is always 12 ounces or so, good size, all the way up to a pound sometimes. It didn't get sunburn. It just performs really well. It's not just attractive. The Blue Ribbon refers to the fact that it's a very, very good looking tomato. Really good flavor, holds well on the vine. It's been kind of a dark horse, you might say. When you've got so many good red tomatoes out there to choose from, how do you choose one? I would recommend people try Blue Ribbon. And if you're still looking for seed, you can find the seed out there. It's a very good one to consider for just an all-purpose, really good red tomato.
It sounds big.
It's big-ish, yes. Okay. It's not a pound plus. Now, here's my big surprise from last year. Every year, there's one variety that surprises me: pineapple.
Oh, well, an oldie but a goodie.
Yeah, an old heirloom variety. I grow it every year, even though some years I only get 6 or 7 fruit, but they tend to be very, very large. Wonderful flavor. The name refers to the rather tangy flavor. This year, I got 14 very large fruit on that one plant, each of them 1.5 to 2 pounds. It's the kind of thing where I'm walking out there in the morning going, is this the night the squirrels discovered it? Is this the morning when the rats got there before I did? These enormous, beautiful fruit. And as I say, 1.5 to 2 pounds a piece. I don't normally want people to count on high yields from heirloom tomatoes. And this is an old heirloom variety. It's been around for a long time. It gives me good results every year. This is kind of like Cherokee Purple 2 years ago, which was my top performing tomato. I don't usually tell people heirlooms are going to be your highest yielders, but the pineapple really, really surprised me with how much it produced. Great quality. I recommend if you have room for 4 or 5 tomatoes, try pineapple as one of them. That would be a good heirloom for this area. And
you're right. It's beautiful. It's sort of a golden orange color.
Yeah, and red striations in the flesh. It slices great. It cooks great. It's just a really interesting variety. And, we do recommend that people get a hybrid, get a cherry tomato, look for disease resistance, and then move on to the open pollinated ones, the heirloom varieties, and see how they do for you. I don't want people to rush out and buy brandy wine. It just doesn't do well in the valley. Look for the heirlooms that are tried and true, and this is one of them.
How did Champion perform for you last year?
It was just fine, as usual. I got a lot of fruit on it. It's a really good red tomato. Now, I have an interesting comment from a customer on Champion. He said, I didn't really like that one. It's kind of tart. And I thought, okay, well, it does color up before it's fully ripe. And this is true of a number of hybrid tomatoes. They are beautiful about a week to 10 days before they're really fully ripe. So if you have that experience, you've had one of these new hybrids like Champion or Better Boy, and you're finding, I really didn't think that had the best flavor, experiment a little. Pick them, bring them in, set them on the counter in your kitchen for 3, 4, 5 days. Squeeze them gently. They start to give a little bit. They're actually really ripe at that point. And it might well be that you're just picking them a little before they're fully ripe because some of these hybrids were bred, in my opinion, for appearance as much as flavor. And so that's something to consider, is that you might want to let it ripen a little more fully on the counter. Now, having said that, there's a whole group of tomatoes I'm getting pretty fed up with. And that is these purple, blue, and black tomatoes. Black Beauty, blue, whatever. We're just finding some of them really, really don't soften. And the flavor is, in my opinion, rather astringent. And I don't know what it takes to get them to have good flavor. If someone out there has come up with a new hybrid purple or blue tomato, we'll talk about the GMO tomatoes in a moment. But if they've come up with a good purple or blue tomato they really think has good flavor, I'd love to know what it is, because so far I'm not impressed.
I did ask the Facebook people who follow Get Growing with Farmer Fred and asked them, okay, what tomato did you really like from 2023? And I did get a reply from somebody whose opinion I respect. He's a high school horticulture teacher, and he said he loved Purple Boy. And so, okay, well, that's good enough for me. I'll give that a shot. So I've got some Purple Boy seedlings coming up now.
I'm writing it down as we speak.
I will tell you what the park's catalog says about Purple Boy.
Purple Boy.
And by the way, I believe the seed is still available from Totally Tomatoes if you're looking for it. They call it intriguing color and delectable flavor. Thank you very much. 80 days to maturity. It's an indeterminate. And here we go with the Playboy Playmate of the Month description. This new tomato combines all the true homegrown tomato tang flavor of the heirloom Cherokee Purple, but with an improved disease resistance package. So now, where Cherokee Purple was under high disease pressure and did not grow well, this hybrid can be grown and enjoyed all summer long. The Purple Boy hybrid tomato is resistant to nematodes, verticillium wilt, fusarium wilt, and tobacco mosaic. Slightly ridged and very symmetrically shaped, these stunning violet-purple tomatoes combine juiciness with strong tomato tang, the type unknown to those rock-hard supermarket varieties. Boy, that's a cheap shot at supermarket tomatoes.
Yeah. Well, of course, they have to pick supermarket tomatoes before they're ripe. And one thing that you should remember, we were just talking earlier about allowing your garden tomatoes to ripen a little more on the counter. It's not a bad plan with the ones you buy at the grocery store too. They are a climacteric fruit. They do continue to ripen after you pick them. If you buy it and it's firm, it's not really ripe yet. And so letting it ripen a bit more on the counter would at least improve those supermarket tomatoes. But I will give that one a try. Purple Boy. I'll run out and get some seed as quickly as I can and get that going.
It does hide the warnings about it at the end of the description, though. It says, stake this vigorous plant well and then offer a little extra help to bring in its crop of giants. We recommend pruning the plant as it grows. For extra large tomatoes, remove all but a few flowers so the plant can concentrate its energy into fewer fruit. They may need some support as they mature on the plant, their massive weight pulling them downwards.
Their massive weight. Well, it is a good idea to stake your tomatoes, yes. And it is true that if you remove all except the first fruit that form, you will get bigger fruit. Personally, I've never done that because I'm not really too concerned about that, but there's nothing wrong with that advice, I guess, except that, the main thing is get them up off the ground. This is really important. Stake your tomatoes no matter what kind they are, except for some of these brand new little compact miniature or dwarf tomatoes, as they're calling them. All the others, even determinate types, need to be staked up to some degree.
That's why I have actually picked for 2024 an oldie but a goodie in that regard, a container tomato called Bush Early Girl, which produces fairly good-sized tomatoes, but on a plant that only gets 18 inches tall.
Right. There's a whole series now. The dwarf tomato series are becoming very popular. I have grown some of these. I haven't grown that particular one. You'll find the yields are okay for what they are. I mean, this is a small plant. There's a bunch of little miniature tomatoes, little Napoli, little Sicily. One of my growers handed me mini Marzano. The plant grew 16 inches by 16 inches, produced about 20 fruit, each of which was about 1 ounce. Okay, if you're in an apartment and you have a balcony, that's a fun thing to do. Many of these are not going to give you the yields you're expecting. And in some cases, in the case of the 2 that I grew, I didn't find the flavor all that outstanding. But there's a lot of people that don't have garden space. And, as someone who's in a town where there's lots of people living in apartments, it's actually handy to have these for fun. They're kind of like the little bush basils. You can grow them in a container. Yes, most tomatoes are not great in containers. These do work in containers. So look for those if you're limited for space, but don't count on very high yields and don't count on super rich summer tomato flavor like you're going to get from a early girl out in the garden that's had full sun all day.
Unlike supermarket tomatoes, yeah. Okay.
Right.
All right. The Bush Early Girl, by the way, is a compact determinate, which means it's going to set most of its crop once and then you can pull it out, I guess. But it ripens in 54 days.
Yeah, and determinate tomatoes are actually really an important thing for people who are wanting to conserve water. This is an interesting aspect of this. People who are limited for space or who want to water less. You can plant them, get them going early in the season, stake them up. They can typically be 3 to 4 foot in the case of most of the ones I'm aware of. They will flower mostly all at once, set mostly one big crop. Yeah, they continue a little bit afterwards. But if you really want to do this and you want to have a room in your garden for some of those fall vegetables that need early planting, if you're limited for space, if you're good at processing, freezing, drying, things like that, then you might want to plant some determinate tomatoes, water them deeply, let them do that one big crop, get it put in the freezer, get it put away, take them out, and then you can plant your Brussels sprouts. So this is actually a way that you can cut back on irrigation. I mean, if it's a determinate type and the crop is set, I mean, the farmers here in Yolo County where tomatoes are the number 1 crop still, actually they bumped almonds off of that.
That's amazing.
Yeah, the tomatoes are back. They do stop irrigating as soon as the fruit is set. And this is true, you do get richer flavor. It even is said to be better for you health-wise, but you're not going to get any fruit after about the end of August. So keep that in mind if you're choosing determinate types or some of these miniature tomatoes.
You've heard me talk about the benefits of Smart Pots, the original award-winning fabric container. Smart Pots are sold around the world and are proudly made 100% right here in the USA. Smart Pots is the oldest and still the best of all the fabric plant containers that you might find. Many of the imitators are selling cheaply made fabric pots that fall apart quickly. Not Smart Pots. There are satisfied Smart Pot owners who have been using the same Smart Pots for over a decade, actually approaching 20 years. When you choose Smart Pot fabric containers, you know you'll be having a superior growing experience with the best product on the market. And your plants will appreciate Smart Pots too. Because of the 1 million microscopic holes in Smart Pots, your soil will have better drainage and the roots will be healthier. They won't be going round and round on the outside of the soil ball like you see in so many plastic pots. The air pruning qualities of Smart Pots creates more branching of the roots, filling more of the usable soil in the Smart Pot. Smart Pots are available at independent garden centers and select Ace and True Value hardware stores nationwide. To find a store near you or to buy online, visit smartpots.com/Fred. And don't forget that /Fred part. On that page are details about how, for a limited time, you can get 10% off your Smart Pot order by using the coupon code FRED. Use it at checkout from the Smart Pot store. Visit smartpots.com/Fred for more information about the complete line of Smart Pots lightweight, colorful, award-winning fabric containers. And don't forget that special Farmer Fred 10% discount. Smart Pots, the original award-winning fabric planter. Go to smartpots.com/Fred. You want to start the backyard fruit and nut orchard of your dreams, but maybe you don't know where to begin. Or maybe you're currently growing fruit and nut trees and you've got a million questions, such as what are the tastiest fruits to grow? Where can I go to buy some of these delectable fruit and nut trees you've been reading about? And then how do you care for all of these trees, including planting, pruning, and harvesting? I've got one online stop in mind for you where all these questions you might have will get answered. It's DaveWilson.com. That's Dave Wilson Nursery, the nation's largest wholesaler of fruit and nut trees for the backyard garden. They have planting tips, taste test results, and links to nurseries in your area that carry Dave Wilson fruit trees. Click on the Home Garden tab at DaveWilson.com for all of these links, including a link to their years of informative videos about growing fruit and nut trees that they've posted on the Dave Wilson Nursery YouTube channel. Start the backyard orchard of your dreams at DaveWilson.com. I think the seed catalogs, especially the specialty tomato seed catalogs like Totally Tomatoes, are getting wise to me because they're starting to throw packets of other tomato seeds in with my order, things that I didn't order because they know he'll plant anything. Just send it. All
well,
right.
They did that to us, 2-3 years ago. They sent this one out that was just a number at the time. And I remember sending a note to the owner of Seeds and Such. What is this one? We need to know. This was really a great performer. It stayed firm late in the season. It produced well. It was a compact plant. He goes, oh, yeah, we're going to send that one out next year with the name It's a Keeper. And that turned out to be an outstanding variety, and I really do highly recommend it. It is really firm. It's one of those tomatoes that you just wonder if it's ever going to ripen. It is ripe. It's just very, very solid. And It's a Keeper refers to the fact that it can sit on your counter, pick it in mid-October, 3-4 weeks later, it is still just fine and still has very good flavor. That's one, again, you're going to have to find it yourself because hardly any retailers are going to have that one available. But It's a Keeper is an interesting new variety that I think has a lot to recommend it.
I've got a couple of those questionable freebies growing now. One is called Super Fantastic, and the other is called Jetstar.
Jetstar. I haven't done either of those. So
well, I tell you, if you lived in Canada, you would like Super Fantastic. Even though I planted it 10-ounce tomatoes, indeterminate. Okay, what else is new? Well, according to West Coast Seeds, which is based in British Columbia, Super Fantastic tomato seeds produce hardy, vigorous vines that adopt well to a variety of climates, immensely popular and an excellent producer on the west coast of British Columbia. These rich, meaty beefsteak tomatoes are very versatile. All right.
West coast of British Columbia is a pretty wet, cool place.
Yeah.
And that's it's like Oregon. Oregon, there have always been special varieties from Oregon State University that are very well adapted to those climates. And this is really important since your podcast is worldwide. There are regional varieties you should ask about. If you're in San Francisco, there's a San Francisco fog variety. That's the name of the variety. My father in coastal San Diego always looked for a particular one that was recommended by garden centers down there. Because if you're cooler, if you're in a climate where it really never gets as hot or warm as it does here, it has we have sunshine, relentless sunshine in the Sacramento Valley from about May 1 till almost the end of October. We can grow just about any tomato variety here in terms of vigor of the plant and yield, as long as it isn't sensitive to high temperatures for pollination. You don't have that in Fort Bragg, California. You don't have that even in Berkeley. You have particular varieties that local gardeners are going to know and your local garden center is going to know. So you do have to seek those out. Some of these ones we've recommended will probably do very well. Juliet, any All-America selection, for example, has been tested in a wide range of climate conditions. But, some of the ones we've talked about, like pineapple or Cherokee Purple, may not be suited in a cooler climate where you just don't get the heat input that we get here.
But if you are subject to morning fog on a regular basis, maybe try that Super Fantastic tomato, the hit of Western British Columbia.
There you go. Now, we mentioned compact varieties, and there is one that I find myself recommending more and more year after year, and I think you're going to grow it this year. When I first read about it, it was described as the classic tomato for sun drying, and it is very, very good for that. In fact, I started growing it just for that purpose because one of my staff people just loves to take them, cut them in half, and dry them. It's Principe Borghese.
Yeah, you wore me down on that one.
I apologize to Italian speakers out there. I have no idea if I'm pronouncing it correctly, but that's how it's spelled. Principe Borghese, Borghese. Very compact plant. It's a very determinate plant. Produces quite a large number of small fruit all at once. You can harvest the whole thing, and you can cut them in half and dry them. And in our climate, you can do that literally by cutting them in half and drying them on trays, right out in the sun if you want to do that. It also happens to be very good for salsas, things like that. And it's a very compact variety. So people who are limited for space, really like a rich flavored, almost gourmet quality tomato, should look into Principe Borghese.
Now, is that a cherry tomato?
It's really more in the Roma category. It's a little more elongated, more firm, more meaty than a cherry tomato. To me, cherry tomatoes are generally very juicy, and this one is not in that category. So it's really more like sauce or salsa tomato with that meaty texture, but very, very good flavor.
That's what a gardener's delight is supposed to be like, too.
Most years it probably is, yeah.
Yes, most years. Yeah, that Jetstar one that I'm growing too that I know nothing about is advertised as being a prolific producer of big globe-shaped fruits that ripen all the way through. Well, that's good to know. Excellent flavor with low acidity, nice compact habit, indeterminate. It gets 3 to 5 feet tall. It does not state the size, though, of the fruit. So I don't know. I'll be trying it. It just says large fruit, have a mild taste, and ripen evenly all the way through. Is that a problem?
I don't think it's a problem for us generally, but I guess it is in some places.
Yeah, now, I guess so.
Well, now, last year, I remember we talked about a very strange tomato that I was growing, and I told you I would give you a report card on this one. Again, now for German speakers, I hope I'm not mispronouncing this, Riesetomate. Riesetomate, Riesentomate. I think I might have thrown an N in there that didn't belong. It looks like a bunch of grapes. It's a single tomato with numerous lobes, and they look like, as I say, it looks like a bunch of red grapes, all one fruit with all these lobes on it. It produced at least 80 fruit for me. They were very, very rich flavored. It's the kind of thing where you just break off a piece and eat them fresh, apparently, is what most people do. But what I did, it was a little bit of a hassle, but I cored them and I cooked them down into sauce. It had very high seed count. And so in this case, there's a lot of seed that had to be strained out, but it made a very rich, tangy sauce. It's got a very high acidity, which is great for some things and not for others. Some people don't like that. Some people do. There's really strong preferences for tomato flavor out there. I get people, I don't want those sour tomatoes. I want the sweet ones I grew up with. This will be in the sour end category, the high acidity category, but it made an amazing salsa, and it is one of the strangest looking tomatoes I have actually ever grown. So if you have room in your garden and you want to grow something truly weird, look for Riesentomate, Riesentomate. And as I say, it looks like a bunch of red grapes all fused into one fruit.
I just went online to see what a Riesentraub looks like, and or a Riesentomate, and there's all these other Riesens. There's a Riesentraub that I'm looking at from Rare Seeds that looks like a very deep red clustered grape-sized tomato.
Yeah, that's basically what it looks like, except it's all one fruit. And the flavor on this is phenomenal. And it is as I say, it's very odd looking. And it looks like I have indeed added an extra N in there. So it is Riesetomate, Riesetomate. And it's a fun one. I mean, every year I grow something for fun. And this one, the yield was amazing. I mean, this is the other thing. Every now and then I'll grow one for fun and I'll get, 3 fruit. That's not particularly satisfactory. This one is a very good producer for me, at least the first year. Got to give it a couple more years to see if it's really worth recommending.
Good. Following your own advice.
Yeah, I'd like to do that.
Yeah, that helps. Yeah, my job now is trying to figure out where I'm going to plant everything, and I think I'm going to be leaning into my smart pots more and more for some tomatoes. So I'm looking at smaller growing varieties as far as total plant height, and I think the Bush Early Girl will fill that bill. Mm-hmm. And I hope my wife isn't listening. I probably should find another container-sized tomato to plant.
Oh, there's a Bush Champion, which I've been told does very, very well. So it's just another one where it's a more compact version of an already familiar fruit. One thing I have done is I've tested this. Even though I have plenty of space, I do grow tomatoes in containers to see kind of what's the minimum. You mentioned the smart pot. What is the volume of your smart pot?
I just bought one that's 100 gallons.
Okay, well, there you go.
No, they come in 1, 5, 15, 20. They come in a wide variety of sizes.
So the very bare minimum that I have found for a normal determinate or normal indeterminate tomato, not one of these miniature ones, these special ones, but a regular, let's say Ace, Early Girl, or any other tomato, a 15-gallon nursery pot, which I just typically happen to have around, the kind of thing you'd buy a tree in, it holds 1.5 cubic feet of potting soil, which is a fairly typical size you'll find in garden centers nowadays. That's our standard for potting soil. Don't skimp on the quality of the potting soil. I can tell you'll get your money's worth by buying a better quality potting soil. But to me, that 1.5 cubic foot minimum size has really been the key. Anything less than that, like a 5-gallon or even a 10-gallon container, by the 1st of July, you're watering every day. Even in the 15-gallon, you're probably going to be watering every day by the end of July. And so just the volume of soil seems to be the biggest factor in success here in the valley, where we have such a hot, dry climate and no rainfall. If you have it on a drip system, a smaller container might work well, but that's just been my experience, is 1.5 cubic feet. When a new tomato growing system comes along, that's my first question. What's the volume of soil? And there are some great tomato growing systems out there that people are using where they're limited for space or don't have actual garden soil. Look for at least 1.5 cubic feet, and bigger is better. There's a crop out there that a lot of people are growing legally now. They didn't used to grow legally. And there's a whole lot of containers for them, these great big cloth bags that you can use. It might be worth looking into some of those even bigger containers. 100 gallons should handle it for you, Fred. And a half barrel typically holds about 3 cubic feet of soil plus a little bit more. I mean, you can grow one tomato in a half barrel. You can grow a couple of smaller tomatoes, but anything smaller than the 15-gallon or that barrel size is even better. Just is going to be a hassle here in the valley. If you're listening in a place where your climate is mild, you don't have to water things every single day, you might get by with a smaller container size. Just to me, looking for that 1.5 cubic foot, buying a soil that retains moisture reasonably well and also has nutrients added to the potting soil, then you won't have to worry about fertilizing later in the season, should carry you through. And my experience is one indeterminate tomato, a couple of determinate tomatoes if you really want to crowd them in there. 2 or 3 pepper plants work fine in that size container, but really the bigger the soil volume, the easier your life will be. And what will happen otherwise is it'll be going great. You'll get to the middle of August, you'll go on vacation for a week, someone won't water it, and the whole thing will just fizzle out. So get a bigger volume if you can. Here's another trick. Set it on the dirt if you have any dirt. So it can root down into the soil below if it has to, because that can also save you some trouble.
Yeah, but you don't want it to clog the holes. You do want drainage.
Yes. It's very important to have good drainage.
Yes, it is. Just so we're all clear on this, I'm not using that 100-gallon container to grow tomatoes. I'm doing a test in smart pots in that 100-gallon container growing plueri trees.
You're growing trees in them. Okay, well, you definitely need a big soil volume for that.
Yeah, well, but I'm going to maintain a height of them to about 5 to 6 feet and just see how much fruit I get. The plueri is a cross from Dave Wilson Nursery. It's a cross between plums and cherries. There are several varieties, and I planted 2 of them because one acts as a pollinizer.
Right. Pollinizer, yeah.
Yes, I'm looking forward just to testing out these smart pots to see if they can handle that kind of a fruit tree and can it produce for years. And one tip I got from Tom Spellman from Dave Wilson Nursery was to grow a fruit tree in a container, you have to control its width. If you control its width so that the branches are no wider than 1.5 times the diameter of the pot it's in, that tree will survive for years.
Wow. Okay, so you're doing summer pruning for size control,
right?
Presumably,
right.
Summer pruning, and you're making sure that it doesn't get too big and woody. Well, that's the bigger the soil volume, obviously, the better in that situation. But he knows what he's talking about. That's definitely the man to give you the advice on that topic. Fruit trees in containers are always very challenging. Tomatoes in containers are very challenging. Yeah. A lot of my customers who are looking for a way to do this that just saves them trouble in the long run are heading out to hardware stores and buying livestock troughs. Mm-hmm. Yeah, these galvanized livestock troughs are not cheap, but they really last well. You can buy plastic ones if you prefer, but the galvanized ones have become very popular. Don't forget to take the plug out when you first fill it. And I actually think it's probably a good idea to drill a couple more holes down there. They hold a significant volume of soil. I've actually grown blueberries in livestock troughs with very, very good results.
That's what I'm doing.
And I would think you could do some of the fruit trees that way as well.
Yeah,
just keep them pruned.
The other benefit of drilling a couple of extra holes in those watering troughs, too, you can bring a drip line up through it, too, so it has a more neat appearance.
Yeah, for my blueberries, getting off on a bit of a tangent here, I used micro sprayers because I found they gave good coverage, and then they kind of sprayed over. So I put another couple containers next to the livestock trough and put strawberries in those, and then I put, you can expand this outward and have all kinds of things in there. Growing food plants in containers, watering is job one. I mean, that really is the key here in the Sacramento Valley or anywhere that you're as hot and dry as we are. Get a drip line in there so it just happens more or less automatically. Otherwise, you can't travel. You can't have a life. You have to stay home and water your plants. So,
well, let's dovetail that back into tomatoes. Are you looking at more shade to grow tomato plants now?
It wouldn't be optimal, unfortunately, for yield, but I do have customers where they have a lot of trouble with sun scald on the fruit. And a couple of years ago, we had an extreme heat event, September 2022. In Davis, it got to 116 degrees 2 days in a row, absolute record. Then it was 110 for 2 days in a row, and then it was 106 for 3 days in a row. If your tomatoes were under irrigated, they fried right out there in the garden. That was really, really hot, but one, we can anticipate that will probably happen again at some point in the future. And two, if you shield it a little bit from that 5 o'clock sun, the hottest time of day, let's say 4 o'clock on, with some shade cloth or position it such that there's a pluery tree or something, giving it a little shade in the afternoon, you can get your fruit through. But also a bit of standard advice I'm finding myself giving, which I wasn't giving 20 years ago. If it's close to ripe, and we're going to have an extreme heat event, pick the fruit, bring it into the house, set it on the counter, let it ripen there. It will ripen properly over 5 to 7 days indoors, even if it's just blushing to color, even if it isn't yet fully colored up for the ripeness. You can let it ripen indoors. If you leave it out in the garden in extreme heat, here's what happens. The plant's metabolism changes and it slows down the ripening, and the fruit is more vulnerable to sunburn. Indoors, under even temperature conditions, it ripens the way it's supposed to. So if there's any question about the weather, let's say you're listening in a rainier climate or a place where you have sudden dips in temperature, but especially high temperature, bring it into the house when any of that kind of weather threatens and just let it continue ripening on the counter.
I just opened my garden diary page to September 30th, 2022. We had the same heat you had there. I wrote, shortest tomato season ever.
Yes, indeed. Yeah.
September 30th.
Yeah, and this is the thing I really count on an October harvest. I mean, my big harvest of tomatoes and peppers every year, and that's what I'm after, is to have them both ripening at the same time so I can make salsa and things like that, is generally the month of October. They've set in August. Usually we get our August cool down. Who was the meteorologist locally who always referred to the August cool down?
Yeah.
Tom Laufman, probably.
It was Tom Laufman. He talked about the state fair effect.
Yeah, and it would always cool down for a few days in August, and you'd get really good pollination, and it's only about 49, 50 days from pollination to ripening, which takes you into October. And I can always count on, except 2022, an extremely heavy harvest of nice ripe tomatoes and nice red ripe peppers right about the same time in the month of October. That's something people don't get in a lot of other parts of the country. And so if there's any threat to that, like let's say an epic heat wave in September, as we had that year, you better pick some early and bring them into the house just for insurance. I know we all like to let them ripen on the vine because that's what we're growing them for, but a little bit of insurance to have them ripen on the counter.
One more note about 2023 results. Out at the Fair Oaks Horticulture Center, the Sacramento County Master Gardeners did a little tomato trial too. And it was an interesting comparison. They planted Big Beef, Lemon Boy, and Celebrity. And they also grew Big Beef Plus, Lemon Boy Plus, and Celebrity Plus. So where were these newer varieties really an improvement? And the results were rather mixed.
Okay. What does the plus refer to? Disease resistance?
Disease resistance or productivity. Apparently, the Celebrity Plus, both you and I have this hate-love relationship with celebrity tomatoes.
Yes, we do. Yes.
But a semi-determinate tomato that generally had a fairly neat growing habit, maybe 5-6 feet or so.
Yeah, intermediate size. Yep.
Yeah. Well, apparently they wrote that the Celebrity stayed fairly compact while the Celebrity Plus climbed up to the top and over our cages.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
More vigorous.
Yeah, more vigorous.
One of the problems I've always had with Celebrity, it's a very popular variety. It's not a vigorous plant in general, and the foliage doesn't shelter the fruit particularly. Very heavy yield. People love the flavor. It's very versatile, but I've always had more of a problem with sun scald on Celebrity than almost any other variety because it doesn't shade the fruit. So that's a case where the plus might be a plus. As with respect to the others, disease resistance, yes, verticillium resistance, fusarium resistance can be very, very useful. Nematode tolerance. And there's quite an alphabet soup of resistances on tomatoes that you find in seed catalogs. For the most part, West Coast or anyone west of the Mississippi, you don't have to worry too much about all those other things you see on there. They're typically late blight, leaf blight disease resistant. Those are not huge problems for us. But VFN can be very useful because if you do get those problems, they can be very, very frustrating. You don't have to have every tomato in your garden with VFN, but it isn't a bad idea to have at least one or two because those soil-borne diseases can be very exasperating when you get them.
We were talking earlier about the super fantastic tomato, the pride and joy of the west coast of British Columbia.
Yes.
And the alphabet soup after the name super fantastic had me going online trying to figure out what the heck is that. Besides the VFFA and TMV, it had GLS. And I'm going, what is GLS? And it turns out it's gray leaf spot, which sounds like something you get in moist climates.
Yeah, it sounds like botrytis or something of that sort, and that would not be typically a problem for us here, again, in our very dry climate. I had a customer walk in a couple of years ago who had just planted his 50 tomato plants, and I thought, ooh, where'd you move here from? And it was some, zone 5, zone 6 USDA climate. And I said, well, that's a lot of tomatoes. How close did you space them? Oh, 2 feet apart. Okay, well, we'll talk about that in a moment. What can I do for you? And he said, well, I want to know when I start my fungicide rotation.
There you go.
And I said, I have never sprayed a tomato with a fungicide in my life because I live in a place, as do you now, congratulations, where we don't have those problems. It doesn't rain in the summer here. And so you typically don't have to worry about all that other stuff, botrytis and the leaf, the late blight, early blight, bacterial leaf spec. Yeah, watch for those when you're buying your plants. And if we have a wet spring, they can be a bit of a problem, but they just go away here typically because we are, let's say 10 to 12% humidity on a typical afternoon in May, June, July, and they just can't get a foothold here.
Jetstar tomato. I don't think I talked about that, this free seed that I got from Totally Tomatoes that, I'll plant it. Let's see what happens because that's the way I am. It calls it our most versatile hybrid is equally suited for the home gardener or the commercial grower. Early maturity and high yielding. Large fruits have a mild taste and ripen evenly all the way through.
I guess that's a problem somewhere.
Yeah, but
wait, back up. A mild taste?
Mild taste. I don't know what that means.
Means not real flavorful. Is how I read that.
If you grow up on supermarket tomatoes, maybe that's a mild taste.
There you go. So out of all these tomatoes we've talked about, I don't think we've really touched on cherry tomatoes. And that's a category that I love novice gardeners to buy. They walk in and they've never grown tomatoes before. They're going to plant 3 or 4. I want to make absolutely sure they walk out with one cherry tomato. There's a whole bunch of different kinds out there. The thing about them is they'll produce almost no matter what. If you're limited for sun, your cherry tomato will grow and fruit there. I mean, it's not perfect, but it will. And if you have sun and you have a way to contain it because they are generally very, very vigorous, they can be extremely productive and very reliable. And there's, Sungold is still the most popular cherry tomato that's out there, that sweet 100, 1,000, 1 million, that whole category. They have their followers as well. There's all these Saladette tomatoes that have come on the market. You know what? They all do really well here. I have yet to find a cherry tomato that doesn't grow and yield well. And one group that you might want to look into are the ones that are being produced by Brad Gates, who you've had on your show many times, the Wild Boar Farms. His cherry tomatoes are phenomenal producers and very, very sweet. Barry's Crazy Cherry. Hundreds of fruit. You won't know what to do with them all. And so look for some of those are open pollinated. Look for the old familiar ones like Sungold. Kids seem to really like Sungold. If you're an old fashioned cherry tomato person, well, you know what? You can still get red cherry. It's still out there. And you might find that the Sweet Million, that whole group is very useful as well. These are just so consistent and reliable almost everywhere that I really would like to see, if you're only planting 2 or 3 tomatoes and you really just want to eat them fresh or throw them in salads, make sure one of them is some kind of a cherry tomato.
Yeah, you talk about locally grown tomatoes and developed here, Wild Boar Farms and Brad Gates, right in town.
Right here, yeah.
Yeah.
And they've been very good performers. I've tested most of them. They're really interesting. Brad really likes colorful fruit. That was the first thing that really attracted him to these open pollinated seedlings that just came up spontaneously in his farm. And there's some of his that are real workhorses for me. I always plant sweet carneros pink. I always plant pork chop. That's a very good yellow tomato if you like that kind of tomato. Very good, reliable producer here. Michael Pollan, named after the author, is being sold under a different name. Can't remember what the other, Mint Julep is the name that's being put on in the southern states. And it's a very good producer, very interesting, really unusual. And I do recommend trying some of his. They're different. Some of them have more acidic flavor. Some of them are very, very sweet. But in general, his Furry Boar series, Sweet Carneros Pink, Pork Chop, Berries Crazy Cherry, Michael Pollan, all very good performers. I plant each of those that I just went through very quickly every year. And we just love to mix them in with the other types because they're so colorful and really interesting fruit.
And you can get them as seed, and in more places you can find the plants, at least around Northern California. And mail order company Peaceful Valley Farm Supply is now carrying Wild Boar Farm tomatoes as well.
And you can save the seed. They're all open pollinated. So once you get them going, one of his problems from a business standpoint, he doesn't control the seed. Once it's out there, you can save it carefully. You have that variety just like an heirloom. They're basically like heirloom tomatoes, except that they're modern heirlooms. I believe that's what we call them, oxymoron.
How much space do you need between tomato plants to stop cross-pollination?
If you really want to carefully save an heirloom or an open pollinated type, it's more a matter of protecting the flower after you've hand pollinated it. Because bees, and particularly bumblebees or the carpenter bees, which are very common in our area, the Xylocopa bees, will go quite a distance from one tomato plant to another. Well, tomatoes are self-pollinating. They don't need bees. They pollinate simply by vibration. The risk is that carpenter bee or that bumblebee went to your early girl and now came over to your Berries Crazy Cherry, and you happen to save that fruit. Now you have a hybrid. So what you do is you tickle the flower, no matter how close it is to the others, because they got to be anywhere in the same garden would be problematic. And then you cover it with cheesecloth or some little mesh bag or something, so you know which fruit you've saved, which you've carefully hand pollinated, and you've prevented it from cross-pollinating. It's not hard to do. It's not hard to save your own seed. But if you're like Fred Hoffman or Don Shor and you've got 30 different varieties out there, you may get some interesting hybrids if you aren't careful about how you save your open pollinated seed.
Exactly. And yeah, that's a good idea too. And you don't have to bag each piece of fruit or every flower. You just the 1 or 2 you want to save for seed.
Right. And you don't need that many. And almost any of these will produce a surprising amount of seed. And of course, you can always buy a new plant next year at your local garden center.
They sell little bags that are great for protecting young fruit from rats and squirrels, although the squirrels in my neighborhood have figured out how to untie the bag and take it off the fruit. So maybe
that didn't take long, did it?
No, it didn't. It's what can you do?
So if you get a little overwhelmed when you're going out there to try and pick tomatoes, I mean, this is something that I really emphasize because I just recently looked at the Master Gardeners list from Sacramento Master Gardeners. It's an outstanding list. Our friend Dan Vera apparently edited it. I don't know how many varieties are on there. There's a whole lot of them. It looked like a committee of tomato folks sat around and passed around their favorite varieties and talked about them. And that can be a bit much for a new gardener. So getting back to the basics, get a couple of hybrids for reliable yield and disease resistance. Yes, early girl or new girl, better boy, champion, celebrity if you like that one, whopper. There's a bunch of them.
Well, the Rugby.
Rugby is an outstanding one. These are hybrids that we know will have good yield and good disease resistance. Be sure to plant some kind of small fruited type so you get a lot of fruit of something. Sungold, Sweet Million, Juliet, cherry tomatoes, all that kind of thing. Plant a couple heirlooms that someone has told you did well for them. At least once, preferably 2 or 3 times. So I'll throw out Mortgage Lifter, pineapple. I've mentioned those. Don't plant Brandywine because it just doesn't yield here in California well. It's a wonderful tomato in the Brandywine Valley of Pennsylvania, but doesn't take our heat well. Be very careful about official beefsteak types because they don't yield well here. Beefsteak, beef master, they just don't set well above about 85 degrees. And then look at some of these heirloom types or the open pollinated ones. Personally, I like Italian heirloom tomatoes of various types. Santorini tomato from Greece, Castelluto Genovese is one of my favorites. I don't know. Fred doesn't particularly like it, but it's that, it's a family favorite. Or some of the Wild Boar Farms types. But get a mix of them, diversify your portfolio, as we like to say, and make sure at least a couple of them are reliable for the area where you're listening.
The training wheel tomato, good for any gardener.
Yeah, the basics. And you mentioned Gardener's Delight. That usually is a very reliable tomato, and I have customers that swear by it. And so I want to see a new gardener getting some that we know are going to do well for them. Yes, one that I was reintroduced to a couple of years ago was Big Beef. We've talked about not doing beefsteak types. Well, Big Beef can go in early, sets early, makes really good size, good quality fruit, and seems to be very well adapted. It was an All-America selection in the 1990s. All right, so I've added that to my top 20. It's not up in the top 10 yet, but it's in the top 20. And I have customers that swear by it now because they've gotten very good, large fruit as early as the first week of July. And speaking of July, out here in Yolo County, Dr. Robert Norris, who's been advising master gardeners here for decades, strongly recommends 4th of July as an early ripening, very good fruiting tomato. And that's done very well for a lot of people. So that's a case where it's a local variety that has a lot of people that have tried it. It's a tried and true in our region. Wherever you're listening, there probably is one like that.
So to recap, this year I will be planting the, however you say it, Principe Borghese.
Principe Borghese.
Thank you. Rugby, Gardener's Delight, Bodacious, New Girl, Purple Boy, Super Fantastic, Bush Early Girl, Jet Star, and one of my favorite cherry tomatoes, Sweet Million.
There you go.
What do you got going?
Well, we actually have about 40 different varieties going in our greenhouse right now. So I always make sure that there's one of the girls out there, and I'll probably do that side-by-side comparison. Absolutely will have Rugby. I'm doing a second year of one called Super Sauce, which was extremely good producer, bigger than Rugby, very similar, one of these very large, meaty sauce tomatoes. So I'll be doing that one again. I'll go ahead and give Riesetomate a second year too, so we can give you a report next year as to whether it was worth all that effort and conversation. And I'll have my usual red and yellow and orange tomatoes from Chef's Choice series, and I'm going to do Orange Wellington next to Chef's Choice Orange, because I've had both, and they're both very good. And I'm curious if Orange Wellington, which I found in the Burpee catalog, is as good a producer as they say it is, and good flavor as they say it is. I've been testing yellow and orange tomatoes for a long time, and I've kind of settled on that Chef's Choice Orange, but I'm always willing to try another one that's getting good reports from other parts of the country.
I'm still fond of Dr. Weiss's yellow. I mean, that's one of my favorite yellow orange beefsteaks to grow.
Well, that's one that you would probably not find at your average garden center. So that's one you better get online, buy some seed real quick. Speaking of which, how late can you start tomato seed to grow tomatoes for the same season? Mid-March, 1st of April? Yes, actually, those are both fine because you can plant tomatoes here all the way through May and all the way even into June. And we go through this, retailers, I don't know, people seem to think we're going to get one big shipment of tomatoes and that'll be it. We'll be running out. No, you can plant tomatoes. You can do them early if you want to and do a bunch of stuff to get them going early. You can plant them generally all through the month of April, but the end of the month is the best time in terms of soil temperature and night temperatures. The month of May is when I plant my vegetable garden. And if I've still got tomatoes around in June, I put them in, I get very good results because, as mentioned, we have a very long growing season here. And every year, as an experiment, I see how late I can plant some tomatoes and still get good yields. First week of July, I have planted 3 or 4 tomato plants every year, and off each one of them, and these are champion and familiar varieties, I've gotten at least 20 fruit. So you can plant quite late in the season where you're listening, if you're listening here in the Sacramento Valley, where we have such a long summer all the way into fall with warm weather all the way into mid to late October. But generally speaking, the month of May in most of the country is tomato planting season. And in this area, mid to late April is really when we recommend getting started. Don't go in too early. Don't put them in when the soil is cold. You sure buy them. I'm never going to talk you out of buying a tomato, but certainly coddle them a little bit. I like to plant my tomatoes when they're 2 to 3 feet tall out of a 1-gallon container. And I can drop them down 12 to 14 inches below what I call the gopher zone. And I can get them off to a good start. And that's really the best way to go. Don't just stick them out in cold soil. You're going to be disappointed.
I noticed that 2 of my favorite tomatoes from last year, the Rugby and the Bodacious, I planted on June 3rd.
Yeah.
So there.
Yeah. And, there's lots of parts of the country where people don't even think about this stuff until Memorial Day weekend. Well, There's nothing wrong with that. Of course, we can start earlier here because we warm up earlier, but there's no advantage to planting way early in cold soil. Of course, it frustrates us because we want to garden as much as you do, and we're delighted to sell these things, obviously. But when the plants are exposed to cold temperatures, it sets them back. So take them, nurture them, coddle them, move them into gallon containers if you have to, then put them out in the garden when, as the old saying was, if you're modest, go out there and sit down on the ground in shorts. Mm-hmm. If you're not cold, the tomatoes won't be either.
Let's spend a minute talking about, this is one of the best tips you've ever told us, and it works like a charm, and that is move up your tomatoes in size. If you go to the nursery, you buy a tomato in a 4-inch pot or the jumbo pack, which is actually a smaller soil volume per plant in those 6-packs. Get them out of there when you get home and plant them in a bigger pot. You could plant them from that into a 1-gallon pot, let them sit in a protected place and be happy in that pot for another 3, 4, 5 weeks or whatever, because it's going to develop a root system that's going to really give that plant a head start.
Yeah, keep them moving. That's really crucial. They're a very vigorous vine, and their roots will go quite deep. Tomato roots can go 3 to 4 feet deep if the soil allows it. And the plants are very vigorous. And when you leave them in that little 4-inch pot sitting on your porch waiting for the soil to be warm enough, they get very, very root bound. I have planted those out with adequate results. I tear those roots apart when I put them in. People watch what I'm doing. They think I'm going to hurt the plant. I say, no, in the long run, it'll be a much better plant, but by far the best thing to do. Take it home. Those 6-packs, honestly, we're really frustrated with them because you get really root bound plants. Get them into the next size up, whatever it is. If it's a 6-pack, go up to a 4-inch or a quart pot size. Ultimately, most of mine, when they go in the ground, are in 1-gallon containers. Doesn't matter how big they get. Doesn't matter if they're 2, 3, 4 feet tall at that point. Drop them down deeper. All your friends who grow tomatoes will tell you to do that. It works. They root out the stem, and you get a nice, well-established plant, but keep them moving so they don't get stunted by being root bound.
By the way, if you were listening to us chatter about tomatoes and you're driving a car and you were trying to write down all the names that we were talking about, and now you find yourself, hugging a telephone pole, well, fear not. There's a transcript available for the podcast at many locales that where you get your podcasts. And now, since mid-March, Apple Podcasts is offering the transcripts as well. So there, it's written down where you can find it.
So if they understood us, they
yeah, I know. Don't go there. Yeah,
the spelling may be hard to work with, but it'll be fun.
This is why I'm not worried about AI.
There you go.
It's like if a guy doing a garden show and the transcript always comes back with root spelled ROUTE, they're not paying attention.
All right. So for your listeners, we got a call. You got a blue tomato, purple tomato that you really like. Tell us what it is, and we'll try it. We'll give it that 2 to 3 year trial and see if any of them are as good as they sound. Because, there is one other blue tomato on the horizon. You've probably been reading about this purple tomato, the first genetically modified plant that the public can buy is a purple-fleshed tomato. It got a lot of publicity, and so it's pretty easy. All you got to do is Google purple tomato, and the information about this one will come up. At $2 a seed, you're not going to find that in a whole lot of garden centers, but some of your friends will probably be growing it. Should be interesting to see what it's like. And my first reaction was, why'd they do a purple one? Those are terrible.
Now, wait a minute. It's a seed?
You can get seed of this purple-fleshed tomato, $2 a piece, and they're out there. You can certainly buy them. It is the first in the United States. There was a genetically modified tomato introduced in Japan last year, which is enriched nutrient status. It had higher something, vitamin A probably. This one is purple, not just purple skin, but vivid purple flesh all the way through. And I can't remember right off the top of my head the name, but you can find it quite easily. Yes, you can buy the seed, as I say, $2 a seed, and you can grow it yourself. And so for years, I have customers who don't want GMOs. I have customers who think they're interesting. It never was an issue. They would say, are any of these GMOs? I would say there are no GMOs in the nursery industry or in the garden industry. That's no longer true. This one is out there, but you have to buy it direct from the supplier. So this purple flesh tomato is going to be certainly a lot of conversation about it. I would be great if someone would grow it and let us know how the flavor is. And who knows, it might actually get into the trade as the price comes down. $2 a seed, you're not going to see a whole lot of bedding plant growers jump into that one.
I just looked it up. It has a very clever name, purple tomato.
Yeah. Well, there was some controversy that I won't get into in too much detail, where a well-known company that only sells non-GMO tomatoes was promoting a purple tomato. And it turned out that they didn't have the seed yet, and it turned out that it was probably genetically modified. So they backed off from that with great chagrin. It is the only purple fleshed tomato has been developed by genetic modification.
Yeah.
Not purple skin, not right. Purple, not Cherokee purple, not black crim.
Not purple boy
skin.
Either.
Yeah. No, none of those. This is a purple flesh tomato. It's quite interesting looking. And I'm guessing some people have already bought the seed, so we'd like to hear your reports on it.
The purple tomato, as described by its developer, who is Norfolk Plant Sciences, the purple
Correct.
Tomato, it contains high levels of antioxidants and anthocyanins normally found in fruits such as blueberries and blackberries.
Yes. And so far, my experience has been that makes them taste pretty astringent. But we'll find out with this one. Maybe they've figured out a way around that problem. So
I'm still trying
forward to reports.
I can't figure out if it's a GMO, but it's available as a seed.
So your next podcast will be with a genetic expert who can tell you how they did that, how they found a heritable condition that could go to the next generation through the seed by genetic modification.
Yeah, so I would think by the time it gets to the seed level, it's no longer a GMO.
Well, there's a matter of definition, and for organic gardeners, of course, they're not going to accept this anyway. But it is interesting that this is the first one that actually is out there that people can buy. I mean, you could go buy a GMO seed of, wheat or not wheat, corn and other things. It is signed quite a contract in order to do it. And it wasn't something a home gardener was going to do. This is actually being offered to the public. So you can find it. You mentioned the company's name, Norfolk
Plant Sciences.
Norfolk Plant Sciences. Yeah. They got a lot of publicity, and it's very attractive looking. I will say that. Let's see how it tastes.
Yeah, it's purple all the way through.
Yep. And ripens all the way through, presumably, too.
Well, we'll see you in the hospital. No, I don't know. I'm sure it's fine. Maybe I wonder if it stains. Huh.
Yeah, okay. Well, someone needs to grow this for us.
Yeah. All right. Well, Don, once again, it's been fun previewing the 2024 tomatoes and talking about previous successes and challenges, because that's what tomato growing is all about. It's the voyage.
That's right. Every year is different. Keep a journal. It can turn out to be really important data 20 years later when you're trying to remember what that variety was you loved so much.
And to remind you that times aren't so bad, you can go back in your diary and see the sentence, worst tomato year ever, from 2 years ago. Yes.
2 years ago, really.
Yes. Ended
early, at least, shall we say, for sure.
Yes. Don Shor is with Redwood Barn Nursery, redwoodbarn.com in Davis, in Yolo County, the hub of the processing tomato world of the United States of America.
That we are, yeah.
And you'll have a lot of these varieties for sale, I would think.
Yeah, we buy in, we grow a lot of our own, and this question keeps coming up. When are all your tomatoes going to be here? The month of April is the big selling month for tomatoes.
Thank you. All right. Don, thanks again. Appreciate it, and happy tomato growing.
It's been great to be here. Thanks, Fred.
I hope you weren't trying to jot down all those tomato varieties we just talked about. By my count, there were about 36 tomatoes mentioned. Well, you can find that list of talked about tomatoes in today's show notes, which is episode 317. They were also part of the transcript for the episode, And many podcast services now provide a transcript. If yours doesn't, you can find the transcript at our homepage, gardenbasics.net. There's one more source for that list of tomatoes, plus a few extras. It's this week's edition of the Beyond the Garden Basics newsletter, which includes links to more information about each variety, including where the seeds might be available. By the way, the operative words in that last sentence, might be available. Maybe, maybe not. There's a lot of sold out signs already posted at a lot of the websites that offer tomato seeds or plants for sale. But I tell you what, in the newsletter, we also have a mini podcast where you can find several of the important points mentioned in that original hour-long podcast. It's the Beyond the Basics newsletter. It's on Substack. There's a link to it in today's show notes. You can also find it at the newsletter tab at the top of our homepage, gardenbasics.net. Or you can just go to substack.com and do a search for Garden Basics with Farmer Fred. Think of it as your garden resource that goes beyond the basics. It's the Beyond the Basics with Farmer Fred newsletter. Garden Basics with Farmer Fred comes out every Tuesday and Friday, and it's brought to you by Smart Pots and Dave Wilson Nursery. Garden Basics, it's available wherever podcasts are handed out. For more information about the podcast, visit our website, gardenbasics.net, and that's where you can find out about the free Garden Basics newsletter, Beyond the Basics. And thank you so much for listening.